I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1707 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, Dr. Bob Rodrigues will return and finish up the story that he started in the previous episode about the assassination of the duly elected Premier of South Vietnam. That was Premier Diem. In this episode, we join Dr. Rodrigues as he is telling how Premier Diem and his brother were thrown into the back of an APC and taken away to meet their ultimate fate. Without any further ado, Dr. Bob, it's all yours. Take it away.
So they were pushed into this vehicle, and there were two of Duong Van Minh's men were in the car with him. The first was Nguyen Van Nung. That's Nguyen VANNHUNG. And the other was Duong Hue Nia. Duong Hue Nia. That's DUONG HIEU NGHIA. Now, supposedly, now here's where we get into the conjecture, because, of course, we don't know exactly what happened because of different interpretations. But supposedly, Nhu protested that the president of Vietnam, South Vietnam, was being taken in an armored personnel carrier. He got into a fight with Nia, argument, and Nia got angry, lurched forward at Nhu, stabbed him repeatedly with a bayonet, stood up in the vehicle, looked at Ngo Dinh Diem, shot him in the head with a pistol, then turned and he saw that Nhu was still twitching around and shot him too. And then they repeatedly stabbed both brothers. This was the work of Duong Hue Nia. Now, prior to the removal of the brothers from the church, there had been an exchange between Nia and Duong Van Minh. And Duong Van Minh held up two fingers. And supposedly that was signed for the execution. Now, when they executed them, this was done at a railroad crossing. And the reason for that was to eliminate any sounds that could be heard. The railroad, they had stopped in front of the railroad. They were going to go to Joint General Staff headquarters, but of course they never made it. The bodies were taken to the Joint General Staff headquarters. They were left there. Lucien Conan, the United States CIA operative, questioned, what's going on? What's happening? And it was revealed to them that the Ngo brothers had committed suicide. Some suggested by poison. Some said there was a pistol that was inadvertently lying in the APC, and they shot themselves, but it came out that they had committed suicide. Well, John F. Kennedy was told this by one of his assistants, Forrestal, and he turned white. He went into shock, and he didn't believe it. He says, they're Catholics. They would not have committed suicide. Well, it later came out that it had been an assassination. The bodies of the brothers were taken to a hospital to just, cause a death. And both were identified. Well, Ngo Dinh Diem was identified as chief of a province, not the president of Vietnam. Ngo Dinh Nhu was identified as chief of library services, not the head of the police. This was done to demean both of them. Now, where the bodies were buried, we don't know. There are a couple suggestions. Some say it was at a prison. Some say it was at a seminary. Some say it was in a local cemetery. But nevertheless, we still do not know the whereabouts of their bodies. In the aftermath, because of a lot of criticism, because of the execution, because the United States was shocked by this, the embassy Lodge, I probably understood that this was going to happen. Okay, although what we know about Lodge's activities are not revealed until after his death in 1985 by one of his advisors, and said that here's some of the things that did happen that Lodge did not admit to. But the reaction was, for the most part, negative that they had executed these two men. What this did is this initiated a split among the generals because they began to not trust each other. And eventually, the leadership of the coup is going to fall apart within months, and they'll bring in another man named Nguyen Khan. Okay, but what you have here was a botched attempt to remove the Ngo brothers, and it led to executions. Historians believe that Duong Van Minh was very upset when he got to the palace and he found out that the Ngo brothers were not there, because he had arranged for TV coverage and, the handover of power. And this is when he gave Duong Hui Nia the two fingers up, okay, meaning let's eliminate them. So Duong Van Minh probably shoulders most of the blame for the executions of the Ngo brothers. Later, he blamed Colonel Nguyen Van Tu. That's Nguyen, Nguyen, D-A-N, and it's Thieu. He was later president of Vietnam. Later, he was one of the last presidents. But he was in charge of taking the palace before the brothers would have left. And he was slow in doing this. So Duong Van Minh blamed him, said, if you had been quicker, then it would not have happened. They would not have been able to leave the palace. He left at about 8 o'clock that night. So this is some of the interpretation that you get. Again, back the Kennedy administration was in shock. Online, there was a audio portion which Kennedy was dictating into his recorder, and he says, we have to take a lot of the blame for this. And he regretted the fact that he said Diem had a very tough road over there. He had a lot of different groups that he had to stabilize. And so from one leader to the next, there was some compassion. Okay, as we know, John F. Kennedy is going to die 3 weeks later in Dallas, Texas. The death pictures of Ngo Dinh Diem and Ngo Dinh Nhu reveal the barbaric way in which they were killed. They were beaten, shot, hands behind their back, which made it very difficult to believe that it was a suicide. In fact, I think it was Time magazine who put their pictures, and he said, suicide with their hands tied. So we found out that it was not a suicide, it was an execution. So that is going to end a very important chapter. Many historians believe that if the United States had been successful in Vietnam, it would have been supporting Ngo Dinh Diem. At this point, John F. Kennedy, the Kennedy administration was thinking about putting troops into Vietnam in a more steady way. Diem did not want this. He did not want American troops in. He felt that once they were in, they would take over. He was very prescient in that. So what we have here is a juncture, a real juncture. And this is actually going to push the United States more into involvement in Vietnam. President Lyndon Johnson follows. He announces support for the Vietnamese government. I want to give you just a couple statistics here, and then we'll end. And I like to give these statistics because they show a pyramid of American troop involvement, troop levels, and then, of course, there is a shadow pyramid of deaths in Vietnam. So let me give you a couple numbers. In 1959, 2 Americans were killed in Vietnam. There were 760 advisors in Vietnam. In 1960, there were 5 Americans killed in Vietnam. There were 900 advisors in Vietnam. In 1961, there were 16 Americans killed in Vietnam. There were 3,025 advisors in Vietnam. In 1962, there were 53 American deaths, Army mostly and Air Force, and there was 11,300 American personnel troop levels in Vietnam. And what you're going to see, these are small numbers because we're going to go up to way over 500,000 by 1968-69. So when we talk 11,000, it's the proverbial drop in the bucket. But as these troop levels go up, so do the KIAs, the killed in action. So we're going to stop there, and next time we're going to begin to look at the Lyndon Johnson administration, how it came to where American became completely involved, boots on the ground, in Vietnam by 1965. Okay, it's complete escalation, on the part of the United States. Okay, thanks, Mac. We'll talk to you again.
But thank you very much, Bob. That was very interesting. Sad and a sorry story. It led to a whole lot more.
Yes, it did.
I'm looking forward with great anticipation to your next presentation, where you talk about Lyndon B. Johnson and how he affected the war. I still to this day remember way back there when he would come on the TV, look out of the audience with a sad look on his face and say, "My fellow Americans, I come to you tonight with a heavy heart. We're going to have to send another 50,000 Americans over to Vietnam." And I was thinking, it's easy for him to say because I'm on my way to Vietnam. That's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to the next episode where you're going to tell us all about it. Thank you again, Dr. Rodrigues. We really appreciate it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1707 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these stories. You are cordially invited to come again soon and often to listen to more coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?